Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Brooklyn was slowly waking up in the golden morning light. The streets, still damp from the night rain, reflected the neon lights of cafes and boutiques. In a small, chic cafe, where the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with that of warm croissants, Elijah Turner busied himself with quiet precision. A 28-year-old black man, Elijah had grown up in this neighborhood and knew every corner, every face. A waiter for several years, he was respectful, attentive, and always smiling, even when some customers looked at him with suspicion or impatience. He had learned to navigate the balance between politeness and dignity, between endurance and suppressed anger. That morning, as he was clearing the tables, a figure caught his eye. A woman in a wheelchair entered the cafe with graceful slowness, her clear eyes scanning the room curiously. She looked fragile, but her upright, confident posture commanded immediate respect. Elijah approached with a warm smile and helped her sit down by the window. She took a newspaper clipping from her bag and handed it to him, with a mixture of shyness and determination. Elijah took the sheet, intrigued. On the paper, a story immediately struck him. A young black boy had been unjustly accused by a teacher at a Manhattan school. Elijah's heart sank. The words of the article resonated like an echo of his own experiences: humiliation, hasty judgment, subtle, everyday racism. The woman looked at him intently, as if she knew the article might awaken something in him. At that precise moment, Elijah understood that this simple act, holding out a newspaper clipping, would change his life forever. That morning, destiny knocked on his door in the form of a piece of paper. And he was ready to open it. Elijah still held the sheet of paper in his hands, his fingers slightly tense. Margaret Reynolds, the woman in the wheelchair, looked at him with an expression both gentle and insistent. "It's a story I found this morning," she said softly. "I think you should read it. You'll see, it has an important message." Elijah frowned, intrigued. He began to scan the article. It described how a young black boy, James Carter, had been wrongly accused by his teacher of stealing an item from his school. Despite evidence of his innocence, the boy had been humiliated in front of the entire class. Elijah's heart sank. Every word echoed from his own life: the impatient customers who looked at him askance, the discreet but hurtful remarks, the hasty judgments about his appearance or accent. Margaret observed his reaction and added, with a slight smile, "I know how it feels. I've seen too much injustice to do nothing. But sometimes, just one voice can change a lot." Elijah looked up and met her gaze. There was something powerful about her calm assurance, something that urged him to act rather than remain silent. "Do you think I could do something?" he asked finally, his voice hesitant but curious. "Of course, Elijah." Margaret nodded. "You may not have all the answers, but you have your experience, your truth. And that's a start." The young waiter took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, he felt that his anger and frustration could be transformed into something real, something constructive. The newspaper, a simple piece of paper, became a gateway to a path he had never dared to take. At that moment, Elijah knew his life was about to change. And it all started with that small, unexpected gesture from a woman in a wheelchair who believed in him. After reading the article, Elijah gently placed the newspaper clipping on the table. Margaret Reynolds looked at it with a mixture of curiosity and expectation. "So," she asked, her voice soft but firm. Elijah took a deep breath. That's exactly how I feel sometimes. You know, when people judge you before they even know you." Margaret nodded. "I know. I've seen too much injustice in my life to remain silent. But I believe in something, Elijah. Even a small gesture can bring about change. Even one voice can awaken a community." The young waiter was touched by her words. He had never spoken so openly about his experiences with anyone, and yet he felt that Margaret understood him. "But, what can I do?" he asked, almost in a low voice. Margaret smiled, a smile that seemed to cross all the barriers of her disability. Come to a meeting tonight at the Brooklyn Cultural Center. We're bringing together people who want to take action, tell their stories, build bridges between communities. You could share your experience. Elijah hesitated. His work schedule, his fear of public speaking, everything seemed to be holding him back. But something in Margaret's eyes convinced him that this invitation wasn't just a coincidence. Okay. I'll come, he said finally, his voice betraying a hint of apprehension mixed with excitement. Margaret nodded, satisfied. You'll see, Elijah. This isn't just a meeting. It's a place where our stories can make a difference. Where our voices matter. As Elijah resumed his shift, he felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. He knew that tonight, something inside him would change. And that a simple newspaper article had ignited a spark capable of igniting a part of his life. By evening, Brooklyn had changed. Streetlights reflected off the damp asphalt, and the cool air carried the distant sounds of the city that never slept. Elijah Turner, slightly nervous, pushed open the door of the local cultural center. The room was bustling with activity. Dozens of people of all ages and backgrounds were chatting passionately. Posters on the walls displayed messages like, "Justice for all, our voices matter, community first." Elijah felt his heart race. He had never been in a place like this, a place where every voice had value. Margaret was waiting for him near the entrance, a reassuring smile on her face. "I'm glad you came, Elijah. You'll see, everyone here wants to listen and learn." Elijah nodded, trying to calm the mixture of apprehension and excitement coursing through him. He stepped into the room and was greeted by a few friendly smiles. Curious faces turned toward him, some extending their hands. A woman in her 40s named Karen approached. "Welcome. Don't worry, everyone here has had similar experiences. This is a safe space." Elijah smiled shyly, feeling for the first time in a long time that he could allow himself to be himself. He sat, listening to the stories of the other members of the community. Each one recounted their struggles against injustice, racism, and indifference, but also small victories and moments of solidarity. When his turn came, Elijah felt a lump in his throat. Margaret gave him a discreet nod of encouragement. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice shaky at first, but gaining confidence as he recounted his own experiences, humiliations at work, unfair judgments, looks full of suspicion. The room fell silent, hanging on his words. Elijah realized that his voice had power, the power to awaken attention, to move, and to create empathy. At the end of his testimony, heartfelt applause echoed through the room. Elijah felt a mixture of pride and relief. This simple act, coming to this meeting, had transformed his fear into new strength. Margaret smiled at him, her eyes shining with pride. "You see, Elijah, this is the beginning. Your story matters. And what you just did is a first step towards something bigger." That evening, as he left the cultural center, Elijah knew he had crossed a boundary. His life as a waiter would now coexist with this new mission, to speak, share, and perhaps change lives, one voice at a time. In the days that followed, Elijah couldn't stop thinking about the meeting. Every gesture, every word exchanged that evening had left a deep imprint on his mind. Margaret was right, her voice mattered. And he wanted to find out how far it could carry. One afternoon, after his shift at the cafe, Elijah returned to the cultural center. He was greeted by Karen and other community members, all eager to share ideas and projects. Elijah immediately felt included. This was no longer just a space for listening, it was a place for taking action. "Elijah, I want you to meet someone," Karen said, approaching. "This is Marcus, he coordinates our programs for young people who are victims of discrimination in schools." Marcus, a black man in his 30s, smiled as he shook Elijah's hand. "I heard your testimony the other night. You have courage, brother. I think you could help a lot of young people feel less alone." Elijah felt a warmth pass through him. For the first time, he realized that his experience, painful and often ignored, could become a strength for others. As the days passed, he attended meetings, met with teachers and young people, and began planning workshops where he would share his experiences and encourage the teenagers to tell their stories. Each encounter strengthened his resolve. One evening, as they were wrapping up a session, Margaret approached him. "You see, Elijah, what we do here doesn't stay in this room. Every word you share, every experience you impart, touches someone else. And soon, this energy will spread far beyond Brooklyn." Elijah nodded, inspired. He understood that this wasn't just a matter of talking, it was a chain of solidarity, where each voice contributed to a larger change. As Elijah left the cultural center that evening, he felt a mixture of excitement and responsibility. He knew the road would be long and fraught with obstacles, but for the first time, he was ready to face them, surrounded by allies who shared his vision and determination. A few weeks after his first visits to the cultural center, Elijah felt ready. The workshops, discussions, and encouragement from Margaret and Marcus had transformed him. He knew his experiences weren't unique, but he now had the courage to share them publicly. One evening, sitting on a park bench near the cafe where he worked, Elijah opened his notebook. He began to write, his words flowing with surprising fluidity. Humiliation suffered, hasty judgments, suspicious glances, rude customers. Each sentence carried the tension built up over the years, but also the hope that he could bring about change. "Are you sure you want to publish this?" asked Margaret, sitting next to him. Elijah looked at her, determined. "Yes. People need to know what it's like to go through what I go through every day. I want it to count for something." Margaret nodded proudly. "Then let's do it. And I promise you, you won't be alone." The next day, Elijah sent his testimony to a small local newspaper. A few hours later, he received a message: "We want to publish your article. Your voice is important." Elijah felt a surge of emotion. His life as a waiter had just taken an unexpected turn. When the article appeared, the reaction was immediate. Messages of support poured in, from neighbors, colleagues, young people who recognized themselves in his story. Some of the cafe's customers, who had previously been distant or suspicious, began to look at him differently, with a respect he had never experienced. Marcus and Margaret congratulated him. "See, Elijah? Even one voice can awaken attention and inspire others. You've just reached a milestone." Elijah smiled, moved. He realized that his long-suppressed anger and frustration could now be used for something positive. His story was touching lives and, little by little, creating a network of solidarity. For the first time, he felt powerful, not through money or status, but through the power of his words and his truth. And he knew this was only the beginning of his journey toward real change. The success of Elijah's article soon attracted attention, but not always the kind he hoped for. Some of the coffee shop's customers eyed him suspiciously, whispering behind his back. One morning, his manager, a white man in his 50s named Mr. Hayes, called him into his office. "Elijah, I heard about your article," he began, his voice tinged with warning. "You know this cafe is a workplace, not a political platform. I advise you to remain discreet." Elijah felt a surge of frustration, but he held it back. "I understand, Mr. Hayes," he replied calmly, "but what I've shared is my truth. And I believe that's important." Mr. Hayes sighed and nodded. "Be careful. Not everyone is ready to hear what you say." Outside the cafe, Elijah encountered contemptuous stares, whispers, and even derogatory comments. Yet each obstacle strengthened his resolve. Margaret and Marcus supported him unwaveringly. "Don't let anyone silence you, Elijah," Margaret said one evening after a meeting. "Change always upsets those who profit from the status quo. But keep speaking, keep sharing. That's where your power lies." Over time, Elijah learned to transform criticism into constructive energy. Every negative remark became a reminder of why he was fighting, so that unheard voices could be heard, so that injustice could be exposed, so that his community could feel they weren't alone. One afternoon, while serving customers, a young black boy approached him timidly. "Sir, I read your article. Thank you, you make me feel like I'm not alone." The boy's words touched Elijah deeply. He understood then that all the obstacles, all the criticism, were nothing compared to the real impact he was having on those who needed it most. His voice mattered. His truth mattered. And every step, no matter how difficult, brought his community closer to tangible change. A few weeks after publishing his testimony, Elijah began to realize the extent of his impact. Messages of support were pouring in from all sides: neighbors, teenagers from local schools, and even teachers who wanted to invite him to speak to their students. One morning, Marcus was waiting for him outside the cafe with a large envelope. "Elijah, look at this," he said, handing him several letters and invitations. "Schools want you to share your experience. Local media are asking for interviews. Your voice is really starting to matter." Elijah felt a mixture of pride and responsibility. "I didn't expect this. I'm just a waiter." Margaret, who was there by his side, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Elijah, this is exactly why you are important. You are proof that anyone, even without status or power, can inspire change." As the days passed, Elijah began participating in school events, community meetings, and youth workshops. Sharing his story, listening to others' stories, and building strong connections within the community gave him renewed energy. One afternoon, as he was leaving a Brooklyn school after a workshop, a group of teenagers approached him. "Mr. Turner, thank you. You make us believe we can make ourselves heard," one of them said, his eyes shining. These words touched Elijah deeply. He understood that his voice, his experience, were not just stories; they became instruments of change, tools to help others rise in the face of injustice. Even the cafe where he worked began to change. Some customers, once critical, now greeted him with respect and curiosity. Others continued to grumble, but Elijah had learned to transform every obstacle into constructive energy. He understood then that his influence grew not through power or money, but through the sincerity and power of his words. And with Margaret and Marcus at his side, he felt ready to go even further, convinced that every voice, even that of a simple waiter, could bring about real change in his city. One rainy morning in Brooklyn, Elijah Turner was working behind the counter at the coffee shop when a familiar face walked through the door. It was Stephen Caldwell, a regular customer who had often looked down on him and, in the past, publicly humiliated him for a minor service error. Elijah's heart sank, but he remained calm. Margaret, sitting at her usual table, looked at him intently and gave him a discreet sign: "Be yourself." Stephen approached the counter, a condescending smile on his lips. "Well, let's look who's become famous now, the writer-waiter, eh?" he said mockingly. Elijah took a deep breath. "Yes, I'm sharing my story. Like many, I've experienced injustice, and I'm trying to turn it into something positive." The other customers in the cafe turned to look at them, intrigued. Elijah, sensing that this was the moment to send a message, continued. "Perhaps you don't understand what it means to live judged before being heard. But I invite you to reflect: each of us deserves respect and dignity, regardless of our color or situation." A heavy silence fell over the cafe. Stephen, embarrassed, didn't know what to say. He looked away and muttered something unintelligible before quickly leaving the cafe, in full view of the customers. Margaret smiled, satisfied. "See, Elijah? You didn't need anger, just truth. The way you speak, the calm you maintain, it does more than any physical confrontation." Elijah felt a quiet pride fill him. This confrontation had not been a victory of force, but of voice, of conviction and dignity. He understood then that what he was doing went beyond his own experience; he was giving his community an example of courage and respect. That day, Elijah knew his voice had truly begun to change perceptions, one step at a time. And he vowed to continue using that power to inspire and protect those who, like him once, had been silenced. A few months after he began sharing his story publicly, Elijah Turner felt his life had changed irreversibly. The small Brooklyn cafe, once a place of simple service, had become a space where customers now greeted him with respect and curiosity. One morning, while he was making coffee, Marcus came running in, his face beaming. "Elijah. Look at this," he said, handing him a regional newspaper. On the front page, an article chronicled his journey from waiter to influential voice in the community, an example of courage and resilience. Elijah read the lines with emotion. The journalist spoke of his testimony, his youth workshops, and how he had inspired part of the city to unite against injustice. Quotes from Margaret and Marcus highlighted his determination and his real impact on the community. That same evening, he was invited to an official meeting with local officials and educators. "Elijah, your story has touched so many people," Karen said, shaking his hand. "You are no longer just a witness to injustice, you have become a catalyst for change." Elijah felt a warmth fill him. Everything he had experienced, all the humiliations, all the criticism, had led to this moment. His voice, which he had long considered insignificant, had found its power and reach. That evening, as he walked home, Elijah remembered the first time Margaret had handed him that newspaper clipping. A simple gesture, a simple piece of paper, and his life had been transformed. He understood that sometimes the simplest events could trigger the most profound changes. Sitting by his window, watching Brooklyn fall asleep beneath the city lights, Elijah felt ready to go even further. He knew this was just the beginning. His voice would continue to resonate, to inspire, to protect, and to create a more just and supportive community. Winter was coming to Brooklyn, but in Elijah Turner's heart, an inner fire burned brighter than ever. Since publishing his testimony and speaking out in the community, his life had changed irreversibly. He was no longer just the waiter behind the counter, he had become a respected voice, a symbol of resilience and justice. That morning, Elijah entered the cafe for his usual service. The customers greeted him warmly, some even sharing personal stories of discrimination and courage. He smiled, realizing how his journey had inspired others to speak out. Margaret, who had been by his side since the beginning, entered, beaming. "Elijah, I have a surprise for you," she said. She handed him a letter from a community organization in the city. They wanted Elijah to become an official mentor for a program for young people facing injustice and discrimination. Elijah's heart swelled with pride. It had started with a simple newspaper clipping handed to him by Margaret, a woman in a wheelchair, and it had sparked a change he never imagined. He had transformed his anger into action, his frustration into inspiration. A few hours later, he spoke at a ceremony at the Cultural Center, before a room full of young people, educators, and community members. He recounted his journey, from the humiliations he suffered at the cafe to the encounters that changed his life. "Each of us has a voice," he said as he concluded his speech, his voice shaky but strong. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Even a simple gesture, a word, or an act of courage can make a huge difference." Heartfelt applause echoed through the room. Elijah looked at Margaret and Marcus in the crowd, their smiles filled with pride. He realized that true strength didn't come from status, money, or recognition, it came from the ability to speak, take action, and inspire others. That day, Elijah knew he had found his place. His voice, once unheard, now resonated throughout the community. And he knew that, thanks to Margaret's small gesture and her courage to follow it, he was leaving a legacy, one of justice, dignity, and hope for all those who had never dared to speak out. Brooklyn continued to live at its own pace, its streets bustling and its lights bright, but something had changed. One voice had awakened hundreds of others, and a simple waiter had become a true engine of transformation.